Most people remember Van Gogh through just two snapshots. One, that night sky that seems to move, a whole universe twisting in blue. And two, a man with a bandage on his head and a part of his ear missing. So we reach for the simplest label, the mad genius. It's convenient. It makes it sound like inspiration burned through his mind, like art devoured his life. But if you slow down and actually read his letters, compare them with witness accounts, and place the hospital records beside them, another storyline starts to form. One that feels more like real life. It wasn't that he was mad every day. It looks more like a crisis that kept returning. Good stretches, then sudden collapse. Like a tide, coming in, pulling back, then surging again. When it hit, he could go all night without sleep. Fear, confusion, impulses he couldn't contain. Sometimes hallucinations, sometimes behavior that put him in danger. And then, it would loosen its grip. He'd come back clear enough to write, to work, to paint. So clear it could look like nothing happened. If a doctor today saw that pattern, suddenly worse, then better, then suddenly worse again, most wouldn't close the case with, he was just insane. Because in this story there are clues, quiet ones, following behind the psychiatric symptoms, and they don't sound like psychiatry. Abdominal pain, constipation, recurring fever and weakness, long-term insomnia, disordered eating, malnutrition, even dizziness, episodes that resemble migraines. And then there's the part people talk about even less. When you pull the camera back from Van Gogh alone to the whole family, you start to see a brutal kind of repetition. Psychiatric instability, decline in function, early deaths, even suicide. It didn't happen to only one person. So no, this isn't about pinning a final diagnosis on him. It's about taking a modern medical lens to a steep, difficult life and tracing the thread again. Because when someone's suffering crosses the body and the mind at the same time, maybe the right response isn't a label. Maybe it's one more question. Was there a deeper cause, something more fundamental, that everyone missed back then? We love to explain Van Gogh in one neat phrase, the madness of a genius. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't really poverty, and it wasn't simply being misunderstood. It was the feeling that an invisible hand kept dragging him back into deep water. Some days he was startlingly clear. He could write letters, he could paint, he could talk about his ideals. And then, other times, it was like someone flipped a switch. Insomnia, fear, confusion, impulses he couldn't contain. And it wasn't only in his mind. There could be abdominal pain, constipation, dizziness and vertigo, sometimes even hallucinations, sometimes behavior that harmed himself. Van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853. His background wasn't disadvantaged. His family included a pastor, an art dealer, and people with social standing. From the outside, his life was supposed to follow a track: school, work, marriage, a respectable ending. But it didn't. As a teenager, he switched schools often, sometimes withdrawing, sometimes dropping out. He struggled with school life, and yet he had a real gift for languages. He learned several. As an adult, he tried one path after another, working as an art dealer, exploring a religious calling, serving as a missionary. Again and again, he ran into walls. In his letters, you can hear a fierce rejection of organized religion, and at the same time, a stubborn insistence on finding his own way. So if you put genius back inside a human life, you see something more honest. A person can be deeply creative, and a person can be deeply in pain. Those two things don't cancel each other out, and he didn't just suddenly go insane. On a timeline, it looks more like he kept getting hit over and over. Early on, people described him as serious, lonely, out of step, and some accounts suggest that even when he was young, sleep was already a problem. After his 20s, crises began to show up more often in the main storyline of his life. At times, he was intensely driven. His output could be astonishing, and then suddenly collapse, despair, confusion, disorganization, and his body kept sounding alarms too: abdominal discomfort, constipation, fevers, poor sleep, episodes that looked like migraine attacks or vertigo. During his 2 years in Paris, his paintings became brighter, but his body seemed more depleted. Poor nutrition, alcohol, smoking, coffee, insomnia. Later, in Arles, the dream of the yellow house burned hot, and it burned him the most. Insomnia, poor diet, alcohol, mood swings. The episodes grew more frequent. He broke with Gogh. The ear-cutting incident happened. Then came repeated hospitalizations. From 1888 to 1890, this was the period when his attacks appeared most obvious and most frequent. At the asylum in Saint-Rémy, the pattern looked like attack, remission, attack again. In severe phases, his thinking was so disorganized that he could hardly create, and then he would improve, clear enough to work again. In 1890, he moved to Auvers. There was a brief calm, then the ending. In late July, he shot himself. A few days later, he died at 37. If you read VanGogh only through the lens of psychiatric illness, you can certainly see mood instability, self-harm, despair, agitation, sometimes delusions or hallucinations. But his story also contains something that's easy to overlook: the physical fragments, GI problems, abdominal pain, constipation, irregular eating, malnutrition, insomnia, a disrupted circadian rhythm, migraines, vertigo, sensitivity to light and sound, alcohol use, and possibly infection and recurrent fevers. When you lay those pieces out, you can see a dangerous loop. The more anxious he felt, the less he slept. The less he slept, the more he relied on coffee and cigarettes to force himself through the day. The more he pushed, the less he could eat. The less he ate, the weaker he became. The weaker he became, the more he might reach for alcohol to numb it. And alcohol, in turn, could further damage sleep and mood. Until one day a crisis breaks open. That's why medicine has brought up one possible direction: acute intermittent porphyria, AIP, a type of acute hepatic porphyria, or IHP. One key feature is this: during an attack, it can affect multiple systems at once. That's exactly why it can be mistaken for a purely psychiatric disorder. It can involve anxiety, insomnia, severe mood swings, confusion. It can also involve abdominal pain, constipation, nausea, and vomiting. It can involve fast heart rate, sweating, blood pressure fluctuations. In severe cases, even seizures and limb weakness. So why has this hypothesis been raised? Because the triggers overlap closely with Van Gogh's late life circumstances: fasting or very low calorie intake, alcohol use, infection and stress, chronic sleep deprivation, certain medications. But this needs to be said clearly: similarity is not proof. We don't have key evidence, so we can only call it a hypothesis, not a confirmed diagnosis, and rushing to dismiss it isn't rigorous either. For example, the absence of skin blisters doesn't automatically rule it out, and the absence of red urine doesn't prove it isn't there. Of course, there are other proposed explanations: Meniere's disease, eye problems, alcohol effects, syphilis, lead poisoning. Each may explain a piece, but it's hard for any one of them to explain, on its own, that intense rhythm of attack, remission, relapse. And there's something else that matters even more. When you pull the camera back to the family, this instability doesn't appear in just one person. He once told his brother, "Our neurosis is a fatal heredity." That isn't a diagnosis. It reads more like instinct, a sense that the family may have carried some vulnerability. But again, we have to be careful. Historical records don't give us modern medical evidence. They can suggest possible. They can't deliver conclusions. So I'm not telling this story to slap a new label on him. I'm telling it as a reminder. When someone's suffering crosses both body and mind, we shouldn't end the story with "it's purely psychological." Because metabolic psychiatric symptoms can have more than one cause. Porphyria is only one. There are others, like Wilson disease, cerebrotendinous xanthomatosis, iron overload, and a range of conditions such as mitochondrial disorders, storage diseases, and urea cycle disorders. Which means, sometimes psychiatric symptoms aren't only a breakdown of the mind. Sometimes they're the body calling for help. Next, let's step into a scene that's common in both psychiatry and the emergency department. Someone suddenly becomes extremely anxious. They can't sleep all night. Their mood swings hard, up and down, fast. And when it gets worse, there may be hallucinations, delusions, behavior that feels out of control. The first reaction from people around them is often, "Is this a psychiatric breakdown?" But the turning point is usually one more question. Do they have abdominal pain? Any nausea or vomiting? Constipation? Is their heart racing? Does their blood pressure swing way up and down? Are they sweating? Shaking? Any seizures? Do their arms or legs feel weak? Did labs show low sodium? If several of those answers are yes, this may not be purely psychological. It could be that the body's internal chemistry, its production line, is getting stuck. Waste products build up, and eventually they hit the brain. In cases like this, there's a powerful illusion. The psychiatric symptoms look like the main story, and the physical symptoms look secondary. But they may be coming from the same event, the same metabolic storm. That brings us to something called AHP, Acute Hepatic Porphyria. Here's a simple way to think about it. Your body makes heme, a molecule that's essential for life. In AHP, one step of that heme-making process gets blocked in the liver. Most of the time, a person may feel fine, but when a trigger lights the fuse, upstream materials start to pile up. Two of the key ones are called ALA and PBG. During an acute attack, they can affect the nervous system, and that's why you can see this pattern. Psychiatric symptoms surge to the front, and then behind them, abdominal pain and autonomic nervous system instability. AHP isn't one single disease. It's a group of related conditions. There are 4 main types: AIP, VP, HCP, and the extremely rare ADP. So why do attacks happen suddenly? Because HP is highly trigger sensitive. Common triggers include certain medications, fasting or a sudden drop in calories, very low-carb diets, alcohol, infection, stress, and in some cases, hormonal fluctuations in women. These factors can push the liver to ramp up production, which makes the buildup worse and can trigger an acute crisis. The classic triad in an AHP attack is abdominal pain plus neurologic or psychiatric symptoms plus autonomic instability. Psychiatric symptoms can include anxiety, depression, insomnia, irritability, a strong sense of fear, sometimes hallucinations or delusions. In a small number of cases, impulsivity or aggression, and when it's severe, there can be confusion, delirium, even coma. Physical and neurologic symptoms often include severe abdominal pain with nausea, vomiting, and constipation, limb weakness and neuropathy, seizure-like episodes, fast heart rate, blood pressure swings, sweating, tremor. So how do you test for it? The key is this: test during the attack. The most common screening test is a quantitative urine PBG test. Often, clinicians also check total urine porphyrins and sometimes ALA if needed, because during an attack, levels are often clearly elevated. After symptoms ease, results may normalize or become less typical. So, if you wait until everything feels better, you may miss the clue. Treatment follows a core strategy. First, remove the trigger. Then, shut down the metabolic storm. And at the same time, manage psychiatric symptoms safely. In practice, that can include stopping suspect medications, avoiding alcohol, not continuing fasting, replenishing carbohydrates, either by diet or IV dextrose. In severe cases, heme therapy may be used. And for patients with recurrent attacks, specialists may consider givosiran after evaluation. Medication for psychiatric symptoms requires extra caution. Priority is given to lower-risk options, and avoiding drugs that could trigger or worsen an attack. And one point matters a lot. Symptom-only psychiatric meds cannot replace metabolic treatment. Ideally, care is shared by a specialist team. Complications also need active management: hyponatremia, seizures, neuropathy, plus acute supportive care, pain control, anti-nausea treatment, fluids, close monitoring of heart rate, blood pressure, and electrolytes. And here's the takeaway: psychiatric symptoms don't always come out of nowhere. Sometimes they're the body sending a distress signal. AHP is a reminder that some episodes that look like a psychiatric break may have an underlying physical cause, one that can be explained and sometimes treated. And when disciplines work together more closely, we're more likely to find the real clue beneath the chaos. If you're interested in stories at the intersection of inherited metabolic disorders, IEMS, and mental health, including cases of metabolic psychosis, you can check out the full written version in the Junyi column.